Roger Stone is known as a man close to Trump who was once sent to prison for not betraying Trump. Roger, author of several bestsellers, an expert in running election campaigns, a researcher, and now also a blogger. He recently published a book called The Man Who Killed Kennedy, and he accuses Lyndon Johnson of organizing the assassination. Lyndon Johnson, of course, was Kennedy's vice president who became president after his death. Yesterday was Johnson's birthday, and the book received a huge response in the press.
Lyndon Johnson is the person who had the greatest personal interest in the assassination of John F. Kennedy. As they say in Latin, qui bono, who benefits? Johnson, was on the verge of being indicted for massive corruption in two huge scandals, the Bobby Baker scandal and the Billy Saul Estes scandal. He was on the verge of being removed from the 1964 ticket and was facing criminal charges. That's why he lured John F. Kennedy to Texas. That's exactly why he dominated the motorcade route.
And
That's why I'm presenting evidence, using witness testimonies, fingerprint evidence, and the deep politics of Texas to draw two conclusions. First, it's impossible that Lee Harvey Oswald was the shooter. Of course, it's impossible that he acted alone. And secondly, there were multiple shooters. That's what the new Paramount documentary establishes. What did the Parkland doctors see? Which, by the way, is excellent, but more precisely, the shooter from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository building, that was a man named Malcolm Mack Wallace. We know this because Wallace left his fingerprints confirmed by the Texas Rangers on the cardboard boxes in the so-called sniper's nest. No fewer than 6 different witnesses see a man who matches Wallace's physical description in the 6th floor window, that is, of average build. He was an expert, a marksman, a Marine Corps veteran, much
more
higher rated as a sniper than Lee Harvey Oswald. At least one person, James Carr, sees him running out of the building shortly after the assassination. So I think I've made my point in that
book.
The Man Who Killed Kennedy, the case against Lyndon Baines Johnson, but I'm grateful to you for mentioning it.
By the way, didn't know that Kennedy's trip to Texas was organized by Lyndon Johnson. Well, and the stories then that we were fed, of course, there was no doubt that they were false. Like, Oswald knew where to hide to stay unnoticed. He was an excellent marksman. He got his orders almost from the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, the KGB, and all the rest. Then Oswald is killed. Then the man who killed him is killed. And then Kennedy's brother, who was running for president with the slogan, "I will find my brother's killer," is killed too. Stone wrote his book only after new evidence was found, after testimonies that had been swept under the rug were discovered. And Dulles, who apparently, on Lyndon Johnson's orders, organized, so to speak, the entire assassination, later headed the investigation committee. And somehow all of this reminds me of the very recent past, the past with the pressure on Trump. Doesn't it remind you of that too? And indirectly, with the obvious involvement of the FBI, CIA, possibly the National Security Agency, and a very similar Obama. The Clintons have a trail of people who died under unclear circumstances, committed suicide, friends, enemies, employees, bodyguards, and especially those who were about to testify against them in court. It really seems like we were ruled by the mafioso Clinton, the gangster Obama, and the thief Biden. I honestly don't even know which one of them is worse. It seems like they're all worse. Every single one of them. So much for fair elections of a people's hero and a tribune who will lead our republic. How did it get to the point where everywhere you look in Russia, people say no matter where you spit, right? And Lyndon Johnson, Kennedy himself, well, I don't want to speak ill of the dead, but he was quite a son of a bitch, to put it mildly. So even just his victory over Nixon is worth a lot. Maybe only Blessed Carter isn't a scoundrel. Well, then he's a fool. I mean, his decisions and actions during and after his presidency, either a fool or a scoundrel, or insane, by the way. There's always a third option, but insane is basically a fool squared. Yeah, something needs to be changed in our Constitution so that these people can't have such enormous powers, such a huge influence on our lives. Roger Stone has known Trump for probably half a century. They're buddies. He just spent a week in Washington consulting Trump and his people. He doesn't say what it was about, of course, but he does share all sorts of other interesting things.
For the 50 years that I've known him, especially since he got into politics, my policy has always been not to discuss the details of my conversations with the president, whether in person or on the phone. So I'm not going to do that now, except to say that he's in great spirits. He has an incredible sense of urgency. He knows he only has 4 years to change it. He is shocked by the level of corruption and the level of hypocrisy that surround the whole deception with the Russian collusion. And this is where John Bolton really comes in. Bolton, being the national security advisor, convinced Trump in September, I believe it was 2012 or 2020, not to declassify the documents on Operation Crossfire.
Karakit persuades
Him that the lives of our intelligence agency personnel will be put at risk, persuades him that this will expose the sources and methods of our intelligence agencies. And a number of our foreign allies who were involved in this conspiracy also speak out, especially the British. The people they are really protecting, the ones who actually exist, are themselves. And these documents have now been valiantly declassified. Tulsi Gabbard, Director of National Intelligence. And we see firsthand the level of this conspiracy. First of all, we know that Hillary Clinton, Hillary Rodham Clinton, as she's called, specifically approved the operation to create this false narrative about Russian interference in the elections to distract from the illegality of her use of a mail server.
For me, the newest thing was that Bolton, while working for Trump, convinced him not to make the documents about the deception public. Well, Russiagate, that Russiagate, oh God, I can't quite figure out what exactly they call it. Well, now, so to speak, everyone kind of calls it Russiagate. And now it turns out he was just covering himself, covering his own ass. At that time,
as you know, Stephen, she destroyed 33,000 emails that are currently under subpoena. Also, to cast doubt on the legitimacy of Trump's presidency, to increase the chances of his removal in an illegal coup. So the Steele dossier, paid for and fabricated on behalf of Hillary Clinton, was forcibly included in the president's intelligence assessment as justification as a likely reason for launching Operation Crossfire Hurricane by James Comey. He knew it was a fake. John Brennan knew it was a fake. This information was also used as part of the justification, the significance of Robert Mueller, who, as they all knew, was out of his mind. They just used him as a front, actually. And also now we know, thanks to Tulsi Gabbard, there was no online hacking of the Democratic National Committee by the Russians or anyone else. Yet,
another piece of news, the Democratic Party built their accusations against Trump on the claim that the Russians, well, Putin, yes, broke into their systems, that Putin broke into their systems, into the Democratic Party's server, copied the materials, and gave them to Trump. And Trump's people started using those materials. Well, I mean, it's clearly a clash between the State Security Committee and Trump's election campaign. But it turned out that neither the Russians nor anyone else actually hacked anything in the Democratic Party. All of this was made up to create the impression that Trump and Putin are connected by a single chain, a rope, a thread.
some brainless fools in the mainstream media still want to argue about this. but they rely on it being true because John Brandon says it's true,
Which, of course,
doesn't make it true. There's no evidence of that. In fact, the forensic evidence that
studied the evidence.
that the judge did not allow me to present at my own trial. Produced by Bill Binney, a renowned counterintelligence expert,
Of information. It proves
that the materials stolen from
the National Committee
of the Democratic Party were downloaded onto some portable device and taken out through the back door, most likely by Sedum Recchi.
Let me remind you, Set Recchi apparently was in contact with WikiLeaks and copied some information about Hillary and the Democratic Party for them. And he was killed by a shot in the back while returning from work. And he was returning from the central office of the Democratic Party, shot in the back.
Thus, Bolton plays a key role in the Russian collusion. But the reason for the search of his home and office is that he apparently keeps these secret documents in violation of the law. He took them with him when he left. Unlike Donald Trump, who under federal law has the right to have any documents he wants. Here's a bit of irony. The judge who made this decision was Amy Berman Jackson, a corrupt judge who handled my case and Paul Manafort's case. When Bill Clinton's access to classified documents was challenged in court, she ruled that Clinton, as a former president, could have any documents he wanted, including classified documents that Bill Clinton left in a sock drawer at his home in Chappaqua, New York. I'm not sure about that, but I do know for sure that Stephen Halper, who received over $1 million from the FBI and CIA to create the whole Russia collusion hoax, is also one of John Bolton's oldest and closest friends.
How do I know this?
No,
I played in a floating poker game with both of them in Washington, District of Columbia, every week when Ronald Reagan was president and George Bush Sr. was vice president, so they're close. Halper's role was never fully revealed, although now it is thanks to these declassifications. I can't help but notice
The thoroughness, the deliberation, the very careful approach
declassification.
of these documents.
A lot of thought has gone into preparing them for the American public in an understandable order. And now, as you know, Stephen, she has a working group studying the classified documents that relate to the results of the 2020 election.
And Stephen Kelper is a new name for me. Bolton's friend got $1 million, as they say, for creating Russiagate. Oh, Russiagate. Someone had to come up with all this, right? The script that then the whole royal crew rushed to carry out. That someone turned out to be a close friend of Bolton. Well, there you have it.
That's because Bolton has various secret documents, and I believe he's working as a foreign agent for Qatar. I believe he's registered under the Foreign Agents Registration Act. That's a terrible mix. Possessing classified documents that you are not legally allowed to keep and possess, as well as representing a foreign state. And I think he's involved in the Russian collusion hoax, but not at the level of John Brennan, James Comey, Susan Rice, or General James Clapper. I think they are all facing charges of conspiracy to commit treason. I think they will all eventually go to trial, most likely in Florida. Since this is an ongoing conspiracy, one of the most recent acts, of course, is the raid at Mar-a-Lago, which is part of the same conspiracy. So this is bad news for the deep state. The trial won't be held in Washington, where they control all the judges and are guaranteed to have a friendly jury. The trial will be held in South Florida, where you'll get a fair trial and a reasonably balanced jury.
Let me explain. The trial has to take place in the location connected to the crime. But in Washington, almost all the judges are bought or under the Democrats' control, and it's very hard to find neutral jurors. That city is 95% filled with blue liberals. But since the FBI went to Florida to Mar-a-Lago searching Trump, remember that whole story, the raid with the police with automatic weapons and all that? By filing a lawsuit over this event, over this raid, you can then attach everything else to this case. That's a smart move.
They've completely run out of ideas, or maybe not. Maybe their ideas are best represented by Zokri Mamdani or Brandon Johnson, the mayor of Chicago. Let's cut police funding. Let's open up the prisons, release everyone. Let's get rid of cash bail, everything for free, free transportation, free health care. And who will pay for that? Do you know what Mamdani said? White people will pay for it. That's what he said. Not me. I didn't say that. He said it. We will do it by raising taxes on white people.
Isn't it amazing that white people in New York, in wealthy neighborhoods, are the very ones who vote for him, campaign for him, and even fund his election campaign? And white people on television and the internet support him passionately or strongly. Now explain to me, how can you get to a point where you do everything you can to help a person who, if he gets the position you're helping him get, will take away your property, your money, and move rapists, murderers, thieves, prostitutes, and drug addicts next to you? Obviously, it's possible. And they understand that. The main point is, it's not that they didn't understand, like in 1917 in the Russian Empire, they just didn't realize what would happen. But here, everyone already understands everything, and yet they keep going. Hooray, hooray. Well, it's not just the top leaders in the Democratic Party, but also the next layer. Mayors, various members of Congress, governors, those from whom the next Politburo will be chosen.
Adam Schiff deceived with a mortgage. He can sit there with that fool Kristen Welger and say he didn't do it, but he did. Everyone can see it. So these liberal elites are going crazy because they're being held accountable. You see, they thought they were above the law, that the law didn't apply to them, but that's not true. What really gets me is when they ask Schiff, he says, no, that's a lie. It's all made up. It's all fabricated. You mean like the fake Russia collusion? How did you make that up?
Yeah, my favorite is Donald Trump is making up this information about me to distract from Jeffrey Epstein. Like, dude, you're the one who signed everything.
The documents, that's...
You lied about representing California while living in Maryland. I don't understand how he's trying to connect this to Trump making him do it.
Honestly, I support full disclosure about Jeffrey Epstein, as it would be very awkward for Bill Clinton. He was the one hanging out with 16-year-olds on the island. Refer to the sworn testimony of Virginia Roberts Giuffre. It's all stated there under oath. Refer to the Federal Aviation Administration Manifest. I covered this, Stephen, in the Clintons' War on Women, Chapter 7, Orgy on the Island, citing the FAA manifest. You should see who flew to the island.
Stopped. To draw your attention, Roger Stone wrote the book Clintons versus Women, or The Clintons' War on Women. That's right. I highly recommend it.
George Mitchell, the Senate Majority Leader. The other day, this was interesting. Donald Trump invited Roger Clemens, the famous pitcher, to the White House. Roger Clemens was never inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame because of an investigation conducted by Senator George Mitchell. Now, we know that we should have investigated why Mitchell went to Epstein's Island 14 times, which he did.
Wow, aren't the Clintons being subpoenaed to talk about this in October before Congress?
Although, historically, Republicans in the House of Representatives tried to subpoena former President Harry Truman. He told them to shove it. Let's see how that works out. On the other hand, if they refuse to testify, what does that tell you? Now they can show up and exercise their rights. Under the Fifth Amendment, it won't look too good. I've done it myself.
But honestly,
Speaking, I invoked the Fifth Amendment when I was asked about 6
January. Not
because I was there, not because I know anything about it, not
because
that I would have done something wrong, but I saw how twisted freaks like Adam Schiff and Eric,
Suavella distort.
your words, a procedural crime. I wasn't going to put myself in that position again. But Bill Clinton, you're an important former president. Why don't you answer these questions about how many times you went to the island? Tell us specifically about the 2 16-year-old girls that Jeffrey Epstein brought for your entertainment.
By the way, I think Clinton will find a way not to go to the congressional hearing, or they'll work out some kind of compromise. like answering from home and maybe not even live, but recording a video with his answers. Well, something like that.
President Trump continues to rise, getting his best ratings ever. Why do you think that is? It's simply because they like someone who makes America safe again, that they feel comfortable when the police and the National Guard protect children and women. Your thoughts on this?
I think that's part of it, Stephen, but the most important thing, as always, is the economy. Remember what we were told. If Donald Trump conducts tougher tariff negotiations with our trading partners, inflation will skyrocket, unemployment will spiral out of control, the stock market will crash, and the country will be in disaster. None of that happened. Two measures that the Federal Reserve should use to determine whether to lower interest rates. These are the unemployment rate and the inflation rate, and both of these indicators are lower today
Or at
the same level as in the last 4 times when the Federal Reserve lowered rates. Jerome Powell is acting like a politician, but he's a lawyer, not an economist. By the way, someone should check his mortgages because he owns hundreds of properties.
But besides,
That he lowered the rates to try to help Joe Biden get reelected. When they gave up on Biden, he lowered the rates again to try to help Kamala get elected. He failed. But now, as I say, the inflation rate and the unemployment rate are either at the same level or lower than they were when he thought it was necessary to lower the rates before. So why isn't he lowering the rates now?
how as soon as Liza
Cook will be suspended. She will be suspended. The court will support it. When scoundrels like Mark Werner, a multimillionaire who got rich in mobile phones, bought a governorship and then a Senate seat, he'll also appear before the grand jury on Russian matters. I think there's a reasonable chance that he'll be indicted too. When he says it's unconstitutional, that it's absolute, it's not true. The president has the authority to remove members of the Federal Reserve Board for cause. Honestly, what I'm hoping for, Stephen, is a complete and final repeal of the Federal Reserve Act. We don't need the Federal Reserve. It's a private bank. We don't need a private bank telling Americans, that is the people, how the economy should be regulated.
there was a lot here that needs to be explained. First of all, in the United States, there is a very strange organization called the Federal Reserve. It was created by President Woodrow Wilson as a financial regulator to ensure the stability of the country's financial system. And Wilson was what they called back then, and I think even now, a progressive liberal, and he tried to reform capitalism by taking away initiative and freedom from private entrepreneurs. Wilson called himself a socialist in a certain sense, and in a certain sense, probably even a communist, yes. So, well, he's kind of like our modern-day Bernie Sanders, like Ocasio-Cortez and others who demand public control over business owners. This is exactly what Duccio Mussolini did in Italy, then Hitler copied it in Germany, and Franklin Delano Roosevelt tried to copy it in the United States of America, but it just didn't work out. Wilson was promoting these ideas 20 years before Mussolini, 20 years before Mussolini. In fact, even before the Marxist revolution in Russia, the Federal Reserve was created as a tool to control financial markets, manufacturers, and so on. The Federal Reserve was established to regulate financial markets. Interestingly, the owners of the banks, the oligarchs of that time, became the owners of this powerful machine. The largest banks in the United States now are Morgan Chase, Bank of America, Citi, and Wells Fargo. They all own shares in the Federal Reserve, which means that under no circumstances will this organization do what we need. Well, I mean the population, and it will always do what the banks need. And these private banks regulate our lives. How is it profitable for them? Right now, there's such a crisis between Trump and the Federal Reserve, I would say. Yes, Trump is trying to create more acceptable conditions for citizens, and the Federal Reserve is doing everything it can to interfere and resist. The head of the Reserve was recently caught in a huge overspending scandal. They're building a new building for themselves there, literally $1 billion in overspending. They're also investigating another member of the board of this bank. There are, I think, 12 of them. They call them directors. And what did they catch her on? The same thing that happened with Schiff and with this Fanny, what's her name? She also deceived the government when getting loans for real estate. Trump actually wants to shut down this ugly growth on the body of our country. I'm taking her to the Federal Reserve. Many economists believe that the wild depression of the 1920s and 1930s happened because of the Federal Reserve's interference in market relations in the United States financial market.
Well, just like with tariffs, as you mentioned, I saw a tweet in left media yesterday. If Donald Trump fires Liza Cook, the stock market will crash like we've never seen before. Come on, one person got fired from the Federal Reserve. That's it.
That's the significance. Today, if the Federal Reserve voted to lower interest rates, with Liza Cook at the table, it would have been 5-4.
As soon as
She is replaced.
or as
Only Powell will be replaced in April. When his term expires, you will have the vote will be 5-4 to lower the interest rate.
Rate.
If interest rates drop, the stock market will soar, not crash.
today's Federal Reserve Board has done everything to help Biden win, then Kamala, and now to make sure Trump's plans don't succeed. They do everything they can. Out of 10 plus chairmen plus the chairman, there are 4 normal people in my opinion. Yes. But let's get back to Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson. Lyndon was once considered the most corrupt president in the history of the United States of America. Well, maybe now Obama, Clinton, or Biden have surpassed him, but back then he was the absolute champion of corruption. Even Kennedy, well, a friend of the mafia himself, a debtor, judging by, well, how should I put it? According to well-known data today, his victory over Nixon was similar to Biden's victory over Trump. With the Italian mafia, which on a large scale just massively replaced ballot boxes in New York and New Jersey. So even a corrupt thug, or rather corrupt thugs, the Kennedy brothers decided to turn him in, and Lyndon apparently didn't want to go to prison for the next 100 or 120 years. And if, let's say, John Fitzgerald Kennedy were to die, then he would automatically become president. And naturally, all the court cases would immediately stop, all the investigations and any jail sentences would come to an end. He really didn't want all of this to start, and he really needed to get rid of Kennedy somehow, and he had that opportunity. And there were people who were ready to organize everything and then confuse everyone, mess with their heads, and classify everything. Look how many years have passed, and we still don't have a clear picture. The documentation about both murders. Robert's son, John's nephew is now the Minister of Health. Trump and Tulsi are there, PAM. Everyone else is trying to help him, but the trails are so well hidden that they simply can't be found. And yet people as persistent as Roger Stone are searching for the last witnesses. How many years ago was that? Yes, scraps of materials. And they confidently say that John Fitzgerald Kennedy was killed on the orders of his own vice president, who later became the United States president, Lyndon Johnson. See you.